You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 28th of March, 2025, on Monocle Radio.
The United States tries to change its relationship with Ukraine from ally to bailiff. Russia accuses someone else of precipitate militaristic behaviour, which is always good fun. And is it theft when the purloined items were being given away? I'm Andrew Mueller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Mueller. It's Friday, so it's our weekly in-house daily, and the Monocle staffers who clearly did something to deserve this are Julia Lasica and Gunnar Gronlid. They'll discuss the day's stuff. We'll meet the editor of Art Basel Hong Kong as they prepare to host Asia's biggest art fair, and we'll have our weekly assessment of what we've all learned. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Mueller, and I am joined today by Monocle writer and researcher Julia Lasica and Monocle producer Gunnar Gronlid. Hello to you both.
Hello, Andrew.
Hi.
Gunnar, you have recently been visiting Norway, which is a not unreasonable thing for you to be doing, given that you are in fact Norwegian, a theme to which we shall be returning. What has that been like?
Well, so after 8 years of being in the UK now, and now a year of working with Monocle and constantly looking at news from Norway, I've been feeling a bit nostalgic. So I'm actually planning on moving back home, and so you'll be getting a lot more local Norwegian news from me, Andrew, which I know you're excited about.
I am excited about that. I have no objections to Norway. I've been there a few times and massively enjoyed it. Are you actually, though, looking forward to Norwegian winters? That is the bit I would struggle with, I think.
Oh, no, I absolutely love them. I miss them so
much. Are you insane?
No. I grew up on a farm where we have the local ski track running through the field. And so we just put our skis on, ride down the field and get going. It's fantastic. I miss it so much.
The whole 10 months of the year without daylight doesn't bother you?
No, it's something about, those quiet months. It gets you reflecting. It gets you thinking thoughts you don't think during the summer. It drives you a bit crazy. But I think it's a good
those
kind of crazy.
Thoughts, bloody hell, I wish the sun would come out?
It is, but you get a lot from that you realise that you miss when you leave, really.
Julia, back here in London, you have been working on the upcoming annual Entrepreneurs special. It's not out for a while. No overt spoilers, obviously, but can you tell us anything about what might be in it?
Yes, so all the things that Monocle loves: retail, business, fashion, design, affairs, all sorts of lovely things. We're going all over the world as well, all the way from Asia and back to America and around the world again.
Well, do we have a newsstand date for that yet?
I think we'll be out sometime in June or July, yes.
Okay, and it will doubtless be plugged remorselessly on all our programmes in the lead up to it. But we will be starting, Julia, with your native country, i.e. Ukraine, which is still being compelled to haggle with the United States over the possible cost of its future. The US has sent Ukraine a new proposal under which the US would receive, in restitution for its previous support and in return for its ongoing ditto, a chunk of Ukraine's considerable mineral resources. Specifically, the US would claim all profits from the Pertinent Investment Fund until Ukraine had paid back all US wartime aid, plus 4% interest. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has not said yes to this, but is being careful not to be seen to say no. Julia, there's not really any chance Zelensky's actually going to agree to this, is there?
No. Well, also, it's not up to him. So first of all, no, he wouldn't agree to this, because what he will do is somehow play for time and hope that sort of events move this kind of dilute this agreement, because at the moment, the way it's being reported in Ukrainian media and the overwhelming public opinion is that it would consign Ukraine to economic slavery. It would become an economic colony of the US indefinitely. There is absolutely no end date to this. And, you were talking about minerals, but it doesn't just cover minerals. It also covers oil and gas and anything that has anything to do with extracting these resources from the ground. So railways, roads, pipelines, ports, processing plants. And the US has veto on who Ukraine can sell things to as well, these minerals. So first of all, Zelensky does not have the authority to say yes or no to this deal. He has to bring it to Parliament, and Parliament will decide. And of course, in Parliament, this sort of thing would never pass because, as we said, it's a sort of consigning Ukraine to slavery.
But if we look away from the terms of this deal, which, as you have delineated, are exceptionally harsh, and it may be just a sort of opening bargaining position, but if a fair deal could be struck, would it necessarily be a bad thing for Ukraine if the United States was directly invested in it, and therefore the United States has an interest to protect?
I think that we have to be really careful because at the moment, the terms that are being offered are absolutely shocking. There's people have been talking about how, well, Trump should have included a clause that he would be able to sort of, have basically it's feudal rights over Ukraine. He's the sort of overlord and young girls would be giving themselves up to him. That sort of thing is horrid. So I think it has to be treated very, very carefully. And I think also that this notion that, if a country is economically invested in another country and then Russia sort of attacks, then that will somehow put Russia off. No, it won't in any way, shape or form. Russia doesn't care. They will sort of steamroll on. Their war machine makes no difference over whether someone else is economically invested in your country. And I think that also, if anything, it would sort of lower Ukraine in the US's eyes because it would be this. I mean, it's being viewed within very imperialistic lens here. It's being viewed as a colony where you would extract things from, and the US would control the sorts of business that would be going on there. And actually, one of the things that Ukrainians are most upset about is the way that it would force the EU out of Ukraine as well, because Ukraine's association and dealings with the EU would be heavily dictated by the US.
Gunnar, is there any argument, though, that what we see here is the United States just being completely guileless and unadorned about what the reality of aid, even among allies, often is? A fun fact, which I checked earlier, the United Kingdom finished paying off the US and Canada, by the way, for World War II aid in 2006.
Well, I don't think so. And the reason why is because, of course, paying back foreign aid during wartime is not unusual. That's the norm historically. But what's different about this is that what the US is demanding isn't merely about remuneration. It's about direct control. Like Julia said, it's basically about creating a kind of colony in Ukraine that they have control of and restricting Ukraine's ability to actually collaborate with the EU or deciding on how it wants to remunerate the US. It basically takes away all of Ukraine's choices. And if it's done in this way, and there's no security guarantees, there's no reason why the US couldn't just keep control of these particular interests for itself and give Russia whatever else it wants if the US thinks it benefits them. It gives no guarantees to Ukraine, and that's what's different about this from normal remuneration of foreign aid.
That being the case, Julia, what options does Zelensky actually have? Does he play for time and hope that at some level the Europeans will come to Ukraine's rescue? Does he think he might be able to come to better terms with the United States? Because I have seen reports in Ukrainian media, at least in English language Ukrainian media, framing this as a choice between being a colony of Russia or a colony of the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what has to happen is that Zelensky, as you said, has to play for time. We know how Trump likes to change his mind, sort of waver on things. I think that also the last time that this happened between Zelensky and Trump, Trump really watered down the agreement as well. And I think that also, as we've seen with the Signalgate sort of leak and all of this kerfuffle in Washington, they are a deeply unprofessional team. So I think that what's happening here is it's almost like they're throwing all these ideas around and they're like, what's the most shocking thing we can possibly put into that document? And it's like they've done that. And now it's sort of baiting the Ukrainians. What's going to happen next? And I think Zelensky has to play it cool, decide, take lots of different pieces of advice, really go back to society, really see what people are thinking, and then go back to Trump and say, well, this is the choice of the Ukrainian people.
Well, sticking with the capriciousness of the current US government, it is easy to lose track of what aspects of the federal government are having its plugs pulled and wires yanked, and difficult to calculate which of these strictures might eventually register with American voters. One which probably wouldn't have was the throttling of the US Agency for Global Media, which oversees broadcasters Voice of America, Radio Free Europe / Radio Liberty, and Radio Free Asia, which Trumpists believed were broadcasting anti-American propaganda. Ironically, generations of European and American leftists have believed the same outlets were broadcasting pro-American propaganda. Anyway, funding is now back in effect after a US court granted Radio Free Europe a stay of execution, but for how long, etc. Gunnar, first of all, did this get pulled on the basic grounds that this is stuff for foreigners, and that's bad in itself, and also most of our voters don't care, so this is an easy win?
I think they consider it an easy win because anything they can bring to the sort of Trump MAGA voter to say that we are bringing more of your taxpayer money back and not giving it to foreigners is a win for that voter base. But I still think it's a huge loss, as with a lot of the foreign aid that they're trying to defund, for the same reasons that you wrote about recently in Monocle Minute, which is that soft power foreign aid, in many cases, it is actually a very selfish act. It is a way to keep American values, the national values, spread out in other countries, and to prevent other enemy states from actually sort of gaining a foothold in terms of the conversation. When this disappears, why wouldn't Russia or China be able to spread their propaganda more easily? This was a vehicle for America to spread American values and to make foreign policy more easy to execute. So that whole sort of way of looking at it, I think, is just very wrong-headed.
Julia, you doubtless have family members of preceding generations who can remember tuning in to Radio Free Europe and perhaps the BBC World Service from the other side of the Iron Curtain.
Yes, I have a very good story, if I may share it
Please.
with the class. Well, my mum, when she'd be going to sleep, so she grew up in Kiev, and her father, my grandfather, was a composer, and so he was, very much on the edgy side of society. And she'd be going to sleep, and my family punctuality it doesn't run in our genes. So she'd be going to sleep very late at night, for English standards, and her dad would be listening to the BBC or to Radio Free Europe, and she couldn't get to sleep because Dad was listening to the radio again. So then in the morning she'd wake up late, and she'd be late on the way to school. And then one day she just got so upset when yet again the teacher had reprimanded her for being late. She said, "I can't do anything about it. My dad is listening to Radio Free Europe." And then the whole class went silent. And the teacher looked at her and said, "I see. Okay, take your seat. Do not say anything more about this." And my mother and my grandfather, my whole family, were exceptionally lucky that the headmistress really liked my grandfather. And she took him to down at the very bottom of the school garden, far, far away from any prying ears, any listening devices. And she talked to him and said that if your daughter ever mentions this again, unfortunately, I will be, I will have to turn you over to the authorities. But what I'm trying to illustrate here is, first of all, how dangerous it was. Mm-hmm. And second of all, if she hadn't been sympathetic to my family, then that would have been the end. Perhaps I wouldn't even be sitting here today. But the second thing is that it's a lifeline. It was a lifeline for normal, creative people, and not even just creative, just anyone who wanted to hear the truth, who wanted to hear about how things were actually going. Because if you can imagine, it was like living with cotton wool all around you, and you had to sort of find your way through it, and you had to hear, and I can imagine it's so claustrophobic, not knowing what was going on in the world, not knowing truth from lie. So I think that job that those radio stations did in that time, and now we've got the resurgence of dictatorship, and they're working in the occupied territories, they're working in countries like Georgia where people are under attack every single day. The lifeline they offer is just invaluable.
And also the amounts of money that these things cost, things like Radio Free Europe, the BBC World Service, in the context of the annual outgoings of the governments that provide them, these are rounding errors. It's absolute beans. And what I don't understand, and this is a leading question, is why, for example, in this country, a Prime Minister of the United Kingdom has never basically laid out to the voters the conversation we've just had here and says, you know what, I'm going to double spending on the World Service. I'm going to triple it. It's one of the best known, most admired, most trusted brands on earth, and it is ridiculous that we are running it down.
Yeah, and I think these types of services that we've had for a long time, for most of us in the UK, in Norway, in the US, I think we just take them so for granted that they exist, and we don't realize, like Julia just said, that without them we can be completely lost in the mire of false information, and that hasn't really been sold to voters. And I think especially in America, even just the soft power, the power of foreign aid, but also just the privilege of having access to real information. It's something that's so taken for granted, something that for former Soviet Union citizens understand much, much better. And it's something that politicians need to help voters understand in order to get this point across, I think.
Gunnar Gronlid and Julia Lasica, thank you both for the moment. We will have more from you shortly. But now, as Hong Kong gears up for Art Basel next week, our Asia editor James Chambers sat down with the fair's director, Angel Seong-la, to discuss the last 12 months in the art world and the final preparations for what is Asia's largest art event.
Yes, I would say that for our Hong Kong show, when things get really real, it's when the M+ facade starts playing our first screening project. And that is another public art project, which is a collaboration between Art Basel and M+, presented by UBS. This year we have Ho Zunian, the Singaporean artists, and usually this starts on the Saturday before the fair, and 7 p.m. on the Saturday before the fair, M+ facade lit up by this brand new screening. And we usually have small celebrations on the Star Ferry, taking a group of regional and local VIPs to kind of unveil this screening project together with us. And that pretty much marks the beginning of our Art Basel Fair Week.
Before Art Basel actually begins, though, you often go on a bit of a walkabout around Asian cities, meeting with key collectors, key galleries. Have you done this year? Where did you go, and what are the types of things you've been hearing?
Yes, I did. We started, actually, I even started the trip slightly earlier this year just to spread out and also give people enough time to think about Hong Kong. So normally I go to the key cities like Seoul, Tokyo, and a few parts in Southeast Asia, usually Singapore, of course, but also Jakarta and Manila. This year I added Manila because I started hearing a lot more about, Manila and Bangkok. I did Bangkok earlier this year, so I thought maybe let's check into Manila during Art Fair Philippines. And that very impressed me by how vibrant and enthusiastic the local art scene is. So that is my new learning from, the pre-show press tour, VIP tour that I usually do.
We often talk about the rivalry between Hong Kong and Singapore, but it's interesting you brought up Bangkok and Manila. What are you hearing about Bangkok? Because, there's an awful lot going on there, and I hear a lot of the Hong Kong art world is now travelling regularly to Bangkok, whereas in previous years it was very much the opposite way around in terms of the direction of travel. What are you hearing about what's going on in Bangkok, a place where they'll probably never have a trade fair or a market like Hong Kong? So it's not a rival in the same way as Singapore is, but what's your feelings about what's going on there?
I think, first of all, the traffic flow actually it goes two-way. Because part of the reason why I'd added a trip to Bangkok and Manila this year was also because these are the two places we observe an uptick in terms of fair attendance. In our fair, we found there are more people coming from these two particular regions. And at the same time, like you said, it is true that Hong Kong people also like to go to especially Bangkok very often. It's always good to find that there is this increased awareness with contemporary art, and that there is growing interests. So I think the flow is two-way. Southeast Asia is definitely a region for further development. There are many rising stars. However, contemporary art is not new in Southeast Asia. The history and the artists, the number of artists that came from this region is always phenomenal. So I think now it is the time, for these regions to make some noise.
That was Monocle's Asia editor James Chambers speaking to Art Basel Hong Kong's Angel Seong. You're listening to The Daily. This is The Daily on Monocle Radio. I'm Andrew Mueller. Still with me are Julia Lasica and Gunnar Gronlid. To Svalbard now, and it is with some hesitation that we even mention the far-flung Norwegian archipelago for fear that someone in the current US administration hears this and adds it to the shopping list. Someone who has definitely heard of it is Russian President Vladimir Putin, who has grimly accused Norway of militarizing Svalbard, almost as if it is completely unimaginable that any country with territory in Russia's general vicinity should have the least cause to even think about tooling it up. Gunnar, you are here, of course, to answer for the entire Norwegian nation. Are you, in fact, he said, slapping the script on the desk, militarizing Svalbard?
We are not. And even Russia themselves...
That's what you would say if you were militarizing Svalbard.
Indeed. Well, when Russia made their accusation, they didn't even present any evidence, which is usual for Russian accusations.
What basically is the deal with Svalbard? Because it is part of Norway. It is just a very long way away from it.
That's right. It's almost 1,000 kilometers off the mainland between Norway and the North Pole, basically. It's an Arctic archipelago that became a sovereign part of Norway in 1920 after World War I, when all these countries decided that Norway would get to have it under the Svalbard Treaty. It's a lot smaller than Greenland, which this whole story is, of course, very related to. It's about 35 times smaller. The population is just around 3,000. But the important part of this treaty that makes it a very interesting territory is that it was agreed that it would be given to Norway on the condition that the signatory countries, which started with like the US, UK, France, a few other countries, and now has grown to about 48 members, they would be allowed to send their citizens there, companies there, organizations there to live, work, and even exploit the island's natural resources. And importantly, it was a rule that Norway could not militarize the island.
And Norway's line is that they are sticking to that. But nevertheless, just to follow that up, is there a history of concerns about its safety? Because this week we've seen Norway's Prime Minister feeling it necessary to declare, and I quote, that Svalbard is Norway and Svalbard is safe.
For the most part, not really, because the Arctic region has really grown in interest in a military sense only in the last decade and a half, perhaps. The only concerns has really been sort of Russian behavior on the island. They became a signatory in 1935 when they were still the Soviet Union. And today, they do have the largest presence on the island other than Norwegians. They're actually the only country that make use of the commercial aspect of the deal. So they've had coal mines there, mineral mines. There's an entire Soviet-era town there that was abandoned when the Soviet Union fell, but they still have a different town where they're doing other kinds of mining. And especially in the last decade, Russia's really been ramping up this kind of imperialist activity there, doing various things like, sanctioned officials who were barred from entering the island would just kind of show up unannounced, sounding a bit like J.D. Vance in Greenland, without telling the Norwegian government and then sort of slagging off the Norwegian government while they were there. In recent years, they've been planting Soviet flags and replacing the Norwegian flags. And, of course, most recently, Putin is accusing Norway of militarizing the island. And it sort of follows the classic Kremlin pattern of making these types of accusations slowly but surely to justify future action. And that's why the Norwegian people are worried. It's why European leaders are worried. But so I was actually a little bit surprised that Jonas Gahr Støre, our prime minister, just sort of put it aside and said, no, don't worry, we're safe, because most experts would say otherwise.
I mean, this is, of course, the playbook, Julia, as you well know, that Russia ran in Ukraine. You invent some threat as a justification for intervening to neutralize it. But is this something else that Europe needs to take more seriously, the fact that there are points of vulnerability, not just immediately abutting Russia, Russia and what Russia perceives as its sphere of influence, but in the Baltic Sea, the High North and the Arctic Circle itself. I mean, we may not even have begun to understand how much more is going to need to be spent on defence.
Absolutely, I completely agree with that. I mean, back in 2014 when, Crimea was annexed from Ukraine and then eastern Ukraine Russia started a covert operation to invade eastern Ukraine, my family and I we became aware that, you're not secure ever, really. You have to be constantly aware of the dangers that are threatening your existence. And this is such an alien mode of thought for anyone here in this country and across, Europe, especially the more west you go. And so it's been really fascinating seeing how Europeans have very slowly been waking up to this idea that actually they're not completely cozy and safe in their homes, that there are forces that threaten them outside, the windows. And I think that since the beginning of the second term of Trump, now that he's threatening Greenland, which is, it's part of Denmark, which is supposed to be the US's ally, we're suddenly realizing, God, we have so many soft spots. We've got the Baltic Sea, like you were saying, we've got the undersea cables that keep getting cut. And what is happening there? Why is there such a soft underbelly of NATO, of Europe? And I think also one way that Svalbard has been described as NATO's Achilles heel, because Russia could easily take the island and then we would have no way of responding in time. And then that's that. Russia's taken a bit of NATO territory and what have we even done about it? So I think they would really call our bluff if something like that happened, and there's so little we can do. So I think understanding where are our weak points, what are our soft, places where we need to really shield ourselves, that's one of the most important things that anyone, any European leader or even business leaders could be looking at now.
Just a final quick thought on this one, Gunnar. Has thinking on this changed in Norway in recent years? Because as is often forgotten, because it's way up in the north and it's not that long, but it is there. Norway does, of course, share a land border with Russia. And have Norwegians started to worry more about that than they used to? I mean, as I may have mentioned on this show once before, an amusing little hobby of mine is every time I've interviewed any current or former Norwegian politician, I've always asked them if they ever watched the series Occupied, which does posit a sort of semi-deniable Russian invasion of Norway. Without exception, they all pretend they haven't.
Funny enough, I haven't either. I swear I'm not pretending. But
it's actually pretty good.
I'll check it out. But honestly, I think I spoke to you this once before on the foreign desk or on this show. Strangely enough, Norwegians are taking a really long time to take this as seriously as they should, given that we share a land border with Russia. In the north, in Kirkenes, which is the city closest to Russia, which has a huge Russian population, there they've really been feeling it because there's this constant ratcheting up of espionage, of tension and violence between the Norwegians and the Russians. And I'm sure the people on Svalbard are also feeling it. But the rest of the country, and again, even hearing it from the Prime Minister, we sort of keep blocking our ears and pretending that this can't come our way, when in fact certainly among the Nordic countries other than Finland, Norway is the most exposed and they have what the Russians want the most. Russia is in the north of Norway doing the same kind of strategy of saying actually Russians have been here for a long time and actually we have a right to this part of Norway. Now they're doing it with Svalbard. It's kind of strange that we're not taking it seriously enough, that our politicians aren't taking it seriously enough, that they aren't sort of saying that this might seriously happen. And the playbook is still a bit to try to appease Russia instead of preparing ourselves for what Russia might do. There's even an international Arctic forum hosted by Russia this week, which of course no one else came to. It was really just Russia. So sort of propaganda event. But strangely enough, Norway sent its Arctic ambassador there. And the language he was using there was very much sort of appeasing Russia. And meanwhile, we're not really warning our population. We're not really preparing ourselves. And we're not even talking to our European allies about maybe the possibility that this treaty from 100 years ago is really not relevant in this age when everyone is ignoring all these treaties. And this is an extremely central spot for our future security.
Well, to an altogether lower stakes ethical dilemma in Japan, where a citizen of Fukuoka has had her collar felt for allegedly helping herself to 160 packets of sugar, sachets of milk and broadly similar condiments from alongside the self-service coffee machine in a convenience store. Her defence, according to local reporting, seems on the face of it pretty reasonable. All this stuff was free. The proprietors nevertheless summoned the wallopers on the basis that the items were free if you were buying a cup of coffee, which she wasn't. So there. Julia, what do you think? Should they lock her up and throw away the key? Is she a malefactor, a ne'er-do-well and a scofflaw?
Very nebulous case, very nebulous. I don't know. It's very hard to tell because also, I want to know what her temperament is like and what are her other dealings in life like. What has she as a citizen done for Japan? No, of course, being silly, but I don't know. I think that there's such a fascinating case. I want to know almost as if she, does she have the urge to steal, but she's just taking it out on free things? In which case, let her go, let her be.
But the contention of the proprietors, as I understand it, Gunnar, is this stuff is sort of free, but conditionally. Like if you buy a cup of coffee, sure, help yourself to a thing of milk or some sugar, but you can't just come in and scoop it by the handful into your handbag. It is also by way of perspective, probably worth noting that the total worth of the item she has stolen is estimated at 395 yen, which might sound like a lot, but it is not. It is in fact about €2.43.
Yeah, it definitely cost a lot more money to arrest this person and deal with the situation.
It may actually have cost more money to phone the police.
Yeah, it probably did. Exactly. And what I would just tell to the business people here is that, if you have a conditional free thing, be very clear about the condition. From what it sounds like reading this, and my experience as well, often when you see these sort of free things, I remember we had free coffee in the convenience store that I worked in when I was a kid. Just put the condition there. Be very clear about what the condition is. If not, you can't be mad that people are doing exactly what it says on the tin, so to speak.
Because it would be regarded as, at the very least, Julia, eccentric behaviour if you went into some sort of fast food concern and just took a whole bunch of plastic forks and napkins.
Yeah, no, I've never done that. Never.
I wasn't accusing you. I was
before a picnic. No, never.
Okay. Well, maybe I am now accusing you because I did want to ask you both in closing. Ask, not accuse, I hasten to stress. Is there anything anybody would like to confess to? Would it be the case if somebody was to investigate your living quarters, they might find a hotel bathrobe or something of that sort?
Yes.
Yes, but I justify it on the fact that if you use a little bit of hotel shampoo and don't finish it, they'll just throw the rest away. So why not take it home?
Yeah, that seems reasonable. I think it's implicit in a hotel room that we don't really care if you take this stuff. But there again, there's not a limitless supply of it. You couldn't steal 160 shampoo bottles from a hotel room.
No, but that's why they don't put 160 in the hotel room at the same time, right? I'm not going to the back room to grab it.
I was going to say, what if you walked past the housekeeper's cart and thought they were looking the other way? Is that theft if you help yourself to a few of those?
I'm going to say two things. One of them is that they're such cute little souvenirs. They just make me think of the holiday again, just let me a little bit of escapism. And also they're so useful when you're traveling. Like if you need to get past any little liquid, restrictions or whatever, super useful. So anyway.
And when you travel around with them, free commercial branding for the hotel. So True. I think you're doing them a service.
Okay, so one, Your Honour, they're cute little souvenirs, and two, basically, I've done them a favour by pinching it. I wish you both the best of luck with that defence. Julia Lasica and Gunnar Gronlid, thank you both very much for joining us. Finally, on today's show, our weekly assessment of the extent to which the last 7 days have enlarged our understanding of our universe. We learned this week that nobody ever again need feel bad about a reply all mishap in a work email chain.
We begin tonight with a stunning breach in national security involving the ongoing highly classified U.S. attacks targeting Houthi rebels in Yemen. The details reportedly discussed openly over a group chat on the unauthorized Signal app among members of President Trump's national security team. A journalist mistakenly invited to the group.
We learned, yes, that a cabal of extremely senior US officials had not only gathered on the messaging platform Signal, which they shouldn't have done, to discuss imminent military action, which they really shouldn't have done, but had somehow contrived to copy in the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, which, for the benefit of listeners unfamiliar with the elementary precepts of operational security, and a big hello to Vice President Vance, Secretaries Rubio and Hegseth, Directors Gabbard and Ratcliffe in the admittedly unlikely event that they're tuning in, is pretty much the last thing office holders should do in such circumstances. Prior to the eruption of this brouhaha, indeed, we had learned that there was nobody clearer on the need to rigorously observe the most minute tenets of operational security at all times and in all circumstances than Secretary Hegseth.
People we rely on to do dangerous and difficult thing for us rely on one thing from us: that we will not reveal their identity and not be reckless with what the dangerous things they're doing for us. That's the national security implications of a private server that's unsecured.
Except maybe Director Ratcliffe.
It's always a good thing that we see that there is investigation and prosecution of folks if they're not handling that classified information.
So let's see where that...
We learned, however, that it's all basically fine anyway, as it turns out that plans for imminent military action aren't actually classified. Seriously, just help yourselves. Which we learned from Director Gabbard, who, to be clear on this, has never given anyone the least reason to suspect that she has absolutely no idea what she's doing, whatever shabby insinuations may have been made by Senator Angus King of Maine.
Senator, I can attest to the fact that there were no classified or intelligence equities that were included in that chat group at any time.
So,
and I
so
defer...
the attack sequencing and timing and weapons and targets you don't consider should have been classified?
I defer to the Secretary of Defense, the National Security Council on that question.
We also learned that Director Ratcliffe has his eye firmly on the ball and thumb doggedly on the pulse, whatever treacherous subtext may have lurked in the questioning of Senator John Ossoff of Georgia.
They're talking about the timing of U.S. airstrikes, correct?
Yes.
Yes, and therefore the timing of sending U.S. air crews into hostile airspace, correct?
Yes.
And therefore the time period during which enemy air defenses could target U.S. air crews flying in enemy airspace, correct?
I don't know that.
And that Director Gabbard's legendary eye for detail is undimmed, regardless of the ignoble imputations of Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut.
So it's your testimony that less than 2 weeks ago, you were on a Signal chat that had all of this information about F-18s and MQ-9 Reapers and targets on strike, and you in that 2-week period simply forgot that that was there. That's your testimony?
My testimony is I did not recall the exact details of what was included there.
The good news is... that we learned that reassurance was on offer for nervous allies of the steadfastness of American leadership, from Trumpist Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia, who met the press to demonstrate that the luminous values of the America that President Ronald Reagan described as a shining city on a hill still blaze brightly, the better to guide the free world.
Should the Defense Secretary...
What country are you? Wait, what country are you from?
The UK.
Okay, we don't give a crap about your opinion and your reporting.
And we learned, as always, that the Commander-in-Chief was both on top of it and determined to get to the bottom of it.
I'm not a big fan of The Atlantic. To me, it's a magazine that's going out of business. I know nothing about it. You're saying that they had what?
They were using Signal to coordinate on sensitive materials and...
Having to do with what? Having to do with what? What were they talking about?
In fairness to the president, we learned that he had much more pressing concerns with which to be dealing.
President Trump's official portrait hanging in the Colorado State Capitol will be taken down tonight. It comes one day after the president complained about this painting on social media, calling it distorted, and he demanded it to be removed.
We learned, yes, that the holder of Earth's most powerful office, thanks again, 77,302,580 Americans, was vexed in extremis by a portrait of himself hung in the Colorado State Capitol building in Denver, exclaiming thus on social media, as will now be read by our perfectly sane and normal things for a grown adult human to get upset about desk chief Fernando Augusto Pacheco.
It is purposely distorted to a level that even I, perhaps, have never seen before. The artist also did President Obama, and he looks wonderful. But the one on me is truly the worst. She must have lost her talent as she got older. In any event, I would much prefer not having a picture than having this one. But many people from Colorado have called and written to complain. In fact, they're actually angry about it.
From which we appear to have learned that while his senior advisors were discussing committing American forces to action, the president was answering the phone to miffed art critics from the Centennial State, solemnly agreeing with them that the portrait made him look like some sort of portly, orange-skinned, weird-haired conman in a shapeless suit and an overlong tie. Not the first time he's complained about being framed, am I right? But sticking with the subject of cold-blooded swamp creatures, we learned that for the first time in Olympic history, rowing could shortly become a semi-interesting spectator sport. Incredible, but true. We learned that at the Brisbane Games of 2032, rowing events will actually be held in the settlement of Rockhampton, about a 7-hour drive away, or what Queenslanders call just down the street. We specifically learned that the rowing will occur on the stretch of the Fitzroy River which flows through Rockhampton, and we learned, although not the hard way, as one or two reckless, unwary and or drunk bathers have down the years, that the Fitzroy River is inhabited.
We had a large crocodile removed here last year, which we wanted removed so that people could recreate on the river without fear of having a human-crocodile interaction.
We, for one whimsical news monologue, believe, however, that the threat of what was there delicately termed a human-crocodile interaction would enliven the usually soporific spectacle of rowing no end and or lead to the setting of some record times. And that is all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Julia Lasica and Gunnar Gronlid. Today's show was produced by Hassan Anderson and researched by Francesca Jokes. Our sound engineer was Steph Chungu. I'm Andrew Mueller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time on Monday. Thanks for listening and have a great weekend.